They kicked in our front door at 3:04 a.m. Black tactical vests, white block letters that read HOA enforcement, flashlights in our eyes, boots on the hardwood, no warrants, no police, just men with cheap radios and even cheaper authority yelling about a non-compliant vehicle parked in my own damn driveway. Only, these men weren't cops. They weren't even real security. They were imposters, thugs, and they made one fatal mistake. They picked the wrong house and the wrong kid. See, my name's Jared Clean. I'm a retired Army Ranger, widow, stay-at-home dad to a 12-year-old boy named Logan. Smart, quiet, the kind of kid who builds Lego tanks and reads military manuals for fun. I taught him discipline. I taught him self-defense. I never thought I'd have to teach him how to survive a fake SWAT raid. But when that man grabbed me, when he shoved me to the floor and barked that this was an authorized inspection, Logan disappeared into the hallway. And 30 seconds later, he came back with the .22 pistol from the biometric safe and pulled the trigger. Everything changed that night. Not just our lives, but the illusion that a peaceful neighborhood, with its trimmed hedges, smiling neighbors, and pristine lawns, is ever truly safe. You think your HOA just writes parking tickets? You don't know the half of it. This is a story of fake power, real danger, and how one boy stood up to a war no one saw coming. If you believe some rules were made to be broken, or if you've ever wondered what your neighbor's really hiding, subscribe now. Because once you hear this story, you'll never look at your neighborhood the same way again. Share your own experience in the comments. You'll subscribe now and turn on notifications, because this war isn't over. Your voice might be the one someone else needs to hear. They came at 3:07 a.m., not with a bang, with a knock, quiet, insistent, like a neighbor dropping off cookies. But we both knew better. My son and I were already awake. Something in the air felt wrong. You can feel it when the silence isn't natural anymore, when the night holds its breath. I checked the peephole. 3 figures in black tactical vests. One held a clipboard. Another had a crowbar dangling by his side. And stenciled in shaky white letters across their chests were 2 words that still send chills down my spine. HOA enforcement. I knew right then. This wasn't real. There's no such thing as 3 a.m. inspections. Not in America. Not under our laws. But in our neighborhood, under Cheryl Ross, everything had changed. And I was about to find out just how far she was willing to go. 2 weeks earlier, she fined me $3,800 for my truck. Said it violated aesthetic standards. Called it militaristic. I called it freedom. She called it non-compliant. And then came the warnings. Then the threats. Then the stares from neighbors who used to wave. My name's Jared Clean. I'm a retired Army Ranger. I served overseas, so people like Cheryl could never hold power over others. And yet here she was, running our street like a dictatorship with manicured hedges. But none of that mattered at 3:07 a.m. Not when the door splintered off the hinges. Not when masked men stormed my hallway shouting, "Authorized inspection." Not when my 12-year-old son Logan, barefoot and trembling, locked eyes with me as a stranger ripped his bedroom door off its hinges. We didn't live in a neighborhood anymore. We lived in a battleground with fences. And tonight, it wasn't my war to fight. It was his. And he was ready. They didn't expect resistance. Why would they? To them, we were just another family too scared to push back. That's how Cheryl kept control, by convincing people that HOA violations were crimes and that she was the sheriff of suburbia. But I wasn't just a dad in a hoodie, and Logan wasn't just a kid with Lego tanks. He was watching, learning, waiting. The first guy reached our hallway, swinging a flashlight like a weapon. "Where's the truck?" he barked. "Where's the paperwork?" I didn't answer. I was too focused on his vest, cheap, flimsy nylon with Neighborhood Compliance Patrol in crooked Velcro letters. There was no badge, no legal seal, just theater. But his hands? His hands were real, rough, fast, trained. He wasn't some weekend volunteer. He moved like a guy who's kicked in doors before, like someone who's been paid to scare people. He shoved me against the wall. My shoulder slammed into the thermostat. Non-compliant lot. We're authorized to seize military-grade assets. You failed to comply with Section 12B. This is your final notice. Final notice? That's when I knew. This wasn't about fines. This was about power, control, punishment. I saw Logan at the end of the hallway, eyes wide, chest heaving. But he didn't cry. He didn't run. He turned quietly and disappeared into his room. I wanted to scream for him to stay down, to hide, but I couldn't move. The second man had already grabbed my wrists, zip ties slicing into my skin. You should have listened, Jared, the first guy sneered. This is what happens when you embarrass Cheryl. That name, spoken like it belonged to a queen or a god. But gods bleed, and my son was about to remind them. From the back of the house, a sharp click echoed. A lockbox. Then a silence thicker than any scream. Then the gunshot. Short, precise, controlled. The guy on my right howled and dropped. Blood poured down his thigh. The other froze, his eyes wild, and then Logan stepped into the hallway, shaking but standing tall. He held the .22 with both hands. Steady, just like we practiced. You've got 5 seconds to get out, he said, or I shoot again. It didn't sound like a threat. It sounded like a promise. The man who zip-tied me didn't move. His eyes flicked between me and Logan, calculating. He wasn't ready for this. None of them were. They'd come expecting obedience, fear, maybe even a tearful apology for violating some imaginary HOA bylaw. What they got was a kid trained by someone who knew what violence really looks like and how to end it. Put it down, kid, the guy finally muttered, hands up. No one wants to hurt anybody. Logan's finger didn't move from the trigger. Then leave. The man on the floor groaned, rolling in pain. Dark red spread across his cargo pants. He wasn't dead, but he wasn't going anywhere either. I watched Logan's hands. They were steady. His knees weren't buckling. His jaw was clenched like I'd never seen before. This wasn't adrenaline. This was survival instinct. This was my son becoming something I never wanted him to be, but thank God he was. Behind us, another voice shouted, "Go! Go!" Feet scrambled, cabinet drawers slammed. The third man bolted from the kitchen, knocking over a lamp as he sprinted for the back door. Gone, just like that. The SUV engine outside revved so loud it rattled the window panes. Tires screeched, then silence. The guy still standing backed away slow. "Tell Cheryl we tried," he said. "We were just following." Logan interrupted him. "She's not in charge anymore." It wasn't bravado. It was truth. Something shifted in that moment, something permanent. A line had been crossed, a wall had fallen, the illusion shattered. The man ran. Logan didn't lower the gun until I whispered, "It's over." His arms dropped, the gun clattered to the floor, and then he collapsed into my arms. He didn't cry, not right away. He just kept whispering over and over, "I thought they were going to kill you, Dad." I held him as tight as I could. I told him he saved me, that he saved us both, that he was safe now, but I could feel it in his heartbeat, fast, chaotic. He wasn't safe, not really, not inside. And in that moment, I realized something far worse than a broken door or a blood-stained floor. This neighborhood had broken my son, and I was going to break it back. The cops arrived 6 minutes later. Real cops with real badges, real weapons, and real questions. By then, the fake enforcers were gone, except for the one bleeding all over my hallway tile. Logan sat next to me on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, still clutching my sleeve like he thought I might disappear if he let go. His eyes weren't blinking, just staring. Through the wall, through the years, through his childhood. One officer knelt beside me and asked, "You the one who called?" I nodded. My son fired in self-defense. He was protecting me. He didn't even flinch. Good kid. They moved fast after that, cleared the house, cuffed the man groaning on the floor, and asked to see the weapon Logan used. I handed it over, unloaded, safety on. The officer glanced at it and whistled low under his breath. "Ruger 22, he muttered. "Clean, well-maintained. How old's the kid?" 12, I said, bracing myself. But he didn't scold me, didn't preach, just nodded. He did exactly what he needed to do. The paramedics came next, wheeling in a stretcher, stabilizing the intruder's leg. I recognized him then. Doug Marston. Cheryl Ross's boyfriend. I'd seen him once at a neighborhood meeting, loud, smug, the kind of guy who smiles too big while saying nothing of value. He had a minor record, I remembered, something about impersonating law enforcement at a music festival a few years back. He wasn't just a hothead, he was dangerous. And now, thanks to my son, he was also disarmed and detained. The officers asked me to walk them through what happened. So I did. Step by step, I told them about the door being kicked in, about the fake uniforms, about the clipboard with HOA compliance citations that looked like they were printed off Google Docs. I handed over the paperwork they left behind. One of the detectives, older guy, salt and pepper beard, took one look at it and chuckled. And not because it was funny, but because it was so clearly stupid it enraged him. "This is fake as hell," he said. "They used Comic Sans on a legal document. That's not just illegal, that's insulting." I didn't laugh. Neither did Logan. They traced the SUV to Doug's name, registered under a Shell LLC, Community Enforcement Solutions, incorporated just 2 months ago. The business address? Cheryl Ross's garage. Let that sink in. She'd built an entire fake security organization from scratch. No oversight, no real credentials, just printed vests, intimidating letters, and a group of unhinged men willing to do her bidding in the dead of night. And worst of all, she made it look official enough to make people obey. And people did obey. We all had, until that night. When I asked the officer what kind of charges they'd be looking at, he didn't hesitate. Conspiracy to commit home invasion, impersonating law enforcement, child endangerment, and if she gave them orders, she's getting hit with everything they are. He paused. And then some. That night, I didn't sleep. Logan did eventually, curled up next to me with every light in the house on. But me? I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the front door, or what was left of it. And I remembered Cheryl's smile, the smug little grin she wore when she slapped me with that $3,800 fine and dared me to fight it. When she told me, "I suggest you comply, Jared. We know how to handle non-compliance." I thought she meant more fines. Turns out, she meant force. But here's the thing about force. It only works if people roll over. And my son, he didn't roll. He stood. He stood when others would have run. He stood for us. And now it was my turn. I wasn't just going to press charges, I was going to burn the whole rotten system she built to the ground. The HOA, the fake task force, the shell companies, everything. Because this wasn't about property lines or vehicles or paint shades anymore. This was war. And war is something I understand. The morning after the break-in felt like a crime scene in disguise. Neighbors were outside walking their dogs, sipping coffee like it was any other day. But I saw them glance at my house. Quick, sharp looks, whispers behind garden fences. No one came to the door, no casseroles, no sympathy, just silence wrapped in fear. And that's when it hit me. Most of them already knew. Maybe not about the break-in itself, but about Cheryl, about her fake rules, her fake titles, her fake power. They just didn't say anything, didn't want trouble, didn't want to be the next target. That's how these HOA dictatorships work. They don't need everyone to agree. They just need everyone too scared to say no. Well, I wasn't scared anymore. I started with the obvious. I called the county clerk's office and pulled every HOA filing, every amendment Cheryl had made since she declared herself president. It was worse than I thought. She'd submitted forms under a loophole clause meant for emergency succession, a clause that required at least 3 board member confirmations. But the signatures were all fake. 3 different names, same handwriting, same pen. Forgery. I took screenshots of everything. Then I called a lawyer. By noon, I had a folder the size of a phone book on my desktop titled Operation Burn Cheryl. Meanwhile, the news started spreading. Not through the HOA bulletin. Cheryl controlled that. But online. A local Facebook group I barely used was already buzzing. Something happened at Jared's last night. Cops were there. Saw an ambulance too. Someone get hurt? Heard it was that HOA nonsense again. And then a name popped up I hadn't seen in years. Derek Blaine. He used to be HOA president before Cheryl. A reasonable guy, retired fire chief, believed in maintaining order, not weaponizing it. When Cheryl muscled him out last year, he left without a fight, said it wasn't worth the drama. Now he posted a single sentence. "I warned you all." That's when my phone rang. Jared? It was Derek. His voice was gravelly, tired. Heard about last night. You okay? No, I said honestly. But we're alive. He didn't ask questions, just said, meet me at Lakeview Diner, noon. Don't bring your son. Click. I told Logan I had to step out. He didn't protest. He just nodded and asked if I'd lock the door behind me. That broke my heart in a way bullets never could. The diner was mostly empty. Derek sat at a corner booth with 2 cups of coffee already waiting. He didn't smile when I sat. He just leaned in and said, she did the same thing in her last neighborhood. I blinked. What? Different town, different name back then. Cheryl Dunning. Used a loophole to take over the HOA. Started enforcing rules with hired muscle. Same game, same tactics. Why'd she leave? She didn't. The place imploded. Lawsuits, resignations. 3 people sold their houses at a loss just to get out. One guy moved in the middle of the night. I stared at him. And no one stopped her? He sipped his coffee. She knows how to dance around consequences. She's not stupid, just cruel. I leaned forward. I'm done dancing. Derek nodded. Then you're going to need more than cops. You're going to need more than cops. Derek didn't say it like a warning. He said it like a man who'd already tried and failed. A man who knew what came next, who'd seen how deep the rot went. I stirred the untouched coffee in front of me. What do you mean? He reached into a manila envelope sitting beside him and pulled out a stack of papers. Photocopies, notarized letters, screenshots of emails. He slid them across the table without a word. You're not the first one she's pushed, he said. Just the first one who pushed back. The documents were from 4 different neighborhoods, all in the past 12 years, all with HOA names registered to someone using variations of Cheryl Ross's real name, Cheryl Dunning, Cheryl Ann D., Cheryl R. Marston, and in each of them, a familiar pattern, complaints about fines, abuse of power, sudden resignations, and fraudulent filings with state housing authorities. She's a virus, Derek said, tapping the stack, jumps from community to community, builds control, then when it gets too hot, she burns the place down and vanishes. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It wasn't just our HOA, it was everywhere. This was bigger than fines, bigger than my truck, bigger than what happened to Logan. This was a pattern of manipulation, legal exploitation, and unchecked authority, a one-woman HOA cartel. I looked up at him. Why hasn't anyone stopped her? He gave me a bitter smile. Because most people don't fight back. They move, they give up. And the few who try, she buries them in procedure. She knows the system. She uses it as a weapon. I leaned back in the booth, every breath suddenly heavier. I had military training. I'd been under fire in real war zones, but I'd never faced this quiet, sanitized form of warfare where the bullets were signatures and fear wore pearls. What do you want from me? I asked. Derek sipped his coffee again. Not a damn thing. But if you want to take her down, I can help you do it right. Legal, loud, permanent. I paused. Why now? Because Logan shouldn't have had to do what he did, and because people like her only stop when someone makes them. I nodded slowly. Then we go public. His eyes lit up for the first time. Good, because I already called a reporter. That night, I didn't tell Logan everything, just that help was coming, that we weren't alone. He asked if the bad people were gone for good. Not yet, I said, but they will be. He went to bed with the door open and a flashlight under his pillow. I stayed up again, rereading every document Derek gave me, and I saw it, her trail, her blueprint for fear, how she'd created compliance task forces with names like Civic Peace Authority and Neighborhood Order Corps. All fake, all designed to look real enough to scare the average homeowner into submission. But she hadn't counted on us, on a boy too brave to run, on a father who'd already buried one love and wasn't about to lose another, on a man who knew what it meant to fight smart. I started building a timeline, a case, a strategy. Because this wasn't just about Cheryl anymore. This was about everyone like her. And I was going to expose them all. The article dropped 3 days later. Front page of the Minnesota Chronicle's online edition, just below a fluff piece about an alpaca farm. HOA horror, fake enforcers, home invasions, and the dark side of suburbia. Logan's name was left out. So was our address. But my name wasn't. They interviewed me for nearly an hour. I told them everything, how the neighborhood security task force kicked in our door, how my 12-year-old son defended our home with a 22, how the so-called president of our HOA, Cheryl Ross, created an entire illusion of legal authority out of thin air. The reporter dug deep. She found the forged bylaws, the Shell LLC tied to Cheryl's garage, the 4 previous neighborhoods with similar stories. She even got a quote from Derek. He called it a decades-long pattern of psychological extortion, hiding behind community beautification. That line caught fire online. It took less than 24 hours for the comments section to explode. "This is insane. I live in a gated community and this hit way too close to home. Can we start a blacklist for rogue HOAs? Kids like Logan deserve better. That boy's a hero." And right when I thought things were shifting in our favor, Cheryl made her next move. It started subtle. A certified letter arrived in the mail, addressed to me in shaky cursive. "Notice of violations, Tier 3 escalation." She was doubling down. According to her records, I had now violated HOA codes related to noise disturbance, the sound of gunfire during the home invasion, exterior property damage, the shattered front door caused by her people, and most insultingly, unauthorized use of lethal force on HOA personnel. I stared at the letter like it was written in a foreign language. She was accusing us of a crime, of being out of compliance because we didn't let her thugs finish robbing us. She added a new fine, $12,400, due in 7 days. That same night, I heard something outside around 2:15 a.m. Footsteps, the sound of something being dragged. I grabbed my flashlight and my .40 Glock, opened the front door, and froze. There, nailed to my mailbox, was a wooden sign. Burned into it with what looked like a soldering iron were the words, "No one's above the rules." Underneath it, a dead rabbit, its throat slit, its body laid out like a warning. That's when I knew. This wasn't just about the HOA anymore. This was personal. And Cheryl didn't want power now. She wanted revenge. The police took the rabbit seriously. They bagged it, logged it as criminal intimidation, and promised to increase patrols near the house. But I knew better than to count on a cruiser that might pass by once every 2 hours. This wasn't something you solved with headlights and paperwork. This was ritual. This was Cheryl. And this was just her opening move. Logan saw the bloodstain the next morning when he stepped outside to grab the paper. I tried to block his view, but I was too slow. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, staring at it, then turned around and went back inside. We didn't talk about it. We didn't need to. Instead, I called Derek, told him what happened, told him I wanted every record, every rumor, every whisper about Cheryl from her past. He didn't hesitate. Within hours, I had a folder in my inbox labeled simply, "Cheryl Before." What I found inside made my blood run cold. Turns out Cheryl didn't start as a suburban dictator. She started as a victim. 2 towns over, nearly 15 years ago, she was involved in a neighborhood fire, house burned to the ground. Investigators ruled it accidental, faulty wiring in the attic. But her husband didn't make it out. She did. So did their toddler son. There was a lawsuit. Settlement sealed. Rumors that the HOA back then blamed her, accused her of negligence. Some even said they tried to evict her from the ashes. That's when she vanished, changed her name, moved, and started building her own brand of justice, one HOA at a time. She went from victim to architect, from survivor to enforcer. Her vision of control wasn't about order, it was about vengeance. Every new community was a blank slate for her twisted redemption arc, and anyone who reminded her of her old life, of her powerlessness, she crushed them. I looked at photos from her last neighborhood, the ones Derek dug up from old newsletters. Residents posing with Cheryl at Community Safety Day, all smiles, all fake. But behind the smiles, a trail of sudden fines, property liens, quiet foreclosures. Fear disguised as leadership. I saw something else in those photos, too. Doug, the man Logan shot, had been in all of them. He was with her then. He'd been by her side for years, playing the role of HOA enforcer, manipulating neighbors through fake legal notices and intimidation. When one community caught on, they'd vanish and move to the next. And now, here they were again, running the same playbook. Only this time, it didn't end the same way. Because this time, they picked the wrong kid, the wrong father, and the wrong house. I closed the file and stared out my window. The sun was setting, but I didn't feel any safer. That night, I loaded every firearm I owned and reinforced every lock. Logan didn't ask why. He just said, "Do you think she's going to try again?" I didn't lie to him. "Yes," I said, "but next time, we'll be ready." He nodded, and then for the first time since the break-in, he smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was a knowing one. Because Cheryl may have written the rules, but we'd just torn up the playbook. It started with the silence. Not the good kind, like when Logan and I would sit in the backyard watching stars and talking about nothing. This was the kind of silence you feel, like a vacuum, like something being pulled away from you before you even realize it's gone. The neighbors stopped waving. No more casual hellos, no more "how's your son doing?" No more friendly nods when we took out the trash, just closed curtains and cold shoulders. One morning, Mrs. Alston, who'd once cried on my porch over her dog's missing collar, actually crossed the street to avoid walking past me. That's how I knew Cheryl had shifted tactics. She wasn't going to break us with force anymore. She was going to break us socially. I got the confirmation a few days later when a new notice appeared on the HOA bulletin board outside the community rec center. Big red letters, "Community alert, ongoing investigation. Residents encouraged to exercise caution." It didn't name me directly, but it didn't have to. Everyone knew. And underneath that headline was a single line, written like a warning. Pending legal matters involving firearms, safety violations, and potential threats to neighbor well-being. It was signed, Cheryl Ross, HOA President, with a shiny new title underneath, Director of Safety Moral Oversight. Moral oversight. I laughed out loud when I read it. Cheryl had just invented a new office for herself. Again, she wasn't just trying to fine us anymore. She was trying to excommunicate us from our own neighborhood. Logan didn't understand it at first. He still waved to his friend Adam when we passed his house on our way to school. Adam didn't wave back. His mom pulled him inside like Logan had rabies. The next day, someone spray-painted our driveway. "Vigilantes live here." Logan asked me what it meant. I told him the truth. It means people believe what they're to, even when it's a lie. He nodded, but he didn't ask more questions. He was starting to understand things no 12-year-old should ever have to. I called a lawyer the next morning, not just to escalate the charges against Cheryl, but to file a civil defamation suit. He listened, asked smart questions, reviewed the bulletin posting I photographed. "This is a hit job," he said. "Calculated character assassination." He was in, and so was I. But Cheryl wasn't done. Because the next time we went to the grocery store, Logan pulled a flyer off the windshield of our car. Bright yellow paper, cartoonish font. "Is your neighbor armed and dangerous?" It listed behavioral warning signs, like displaying paranoia about HOA procedures, training children in weapon use, aggressive behavior in community meetings. At the bottom, a web address, www.safestreetfamilies.org. I visited the site that night. It was real, professionally built, polished, and completely anonymous. The site didn't mention me by name, but every image, every case study, every euphemism was aimed at one family. Ours. It had a section on handling unstable ex-military residents and recognizing signs of suburban domestic radicalization. It was absurd. It was slander. It was brilliant. Because it worked. I checked the site registry. It was protected, private domain, hidden behind layers of encryption and LLCs. But I recognized the structure. Same template as Cheryl's fake enforcement sites. Same phrasing, same pattern. It was her. She was trying to poison the water so no one would dare help us. Not the neighbors, not the board, not the people who were supposed to stand with us. And for a while, it worked. People stopped returning my emails. Community meetings were canceled with no explanation. Logan's school called and recommended counseling, hinting at concerns about home environment stability. Cheryl was turning our life into a rumor. But here's the thing about war. You only lose if you surrender. And I'd taught Logan something long before any of this happened. You don't win by being loud. You win by being precise. So I stopped trying to shout the truth, and I started preparing to prove it. Sometimes the truth hides in places no one thinks to look, like a basement. And sometimes it doesn't hide at all. It just waits for someone brave or desperate enough to open the right door. Derek and I met again, this time in the back lot of an old storage unit facility on the edge of town. Neutral ground, cameras on every corner. We sat in his truck, sipping stale gas station coffee while he unrolled a blueprint across the dash. She keeps records, he said. Cheryl doesn't trust digital files, too traceable. She keeps the serious stuff locked in paper. Notebooks, handwritten ledgers, receipts, fines, threat letters. All of it's in her house. I raised an eyebrow. And you know this because... He didn't blink. Because I helped her build the damn cabinet. Apparently years ago, before Cheryl turned full despot, she'd asked Derek, a former fire chief and amateur carpenter, to install a secure record cabinet in her basement, steel-lined, disguised as an HVAC panel. He never asked why, but now he knew. She keeps it behind a false wall. You'd miss it unless you knew to knock for hollow studs. We planned for a week. I set up new surveillance cameras, bought burner phones, encrypted hard drives, even hired a private investigator to verify every step. I didn't want revenge. I wanted proof. Because that was the only way to save Logan from a life of whispers and side-eyes, the only way to clear our names, to take Cheryl down by her own hand. Then, on a rainy Thursday night, while Cheryl was hosting an HOA board retreat at a vineyard upstate, Derek and I made our move. I didn't break in. I walked in. Cheryl had once asked me during the early days of her regime to help her move some garden furniture into her backyard. She'd given me a key. She must have forgotten. Or maybe she never imagined I'd use it. The house was pristine. Artificial flowers, antiseptic scent, photo frames with smiling neighbors who'd all since moved away. But the basement, that was where the real Cheryl lived. We found the cabinet within minutes, hidden behind a panel that looked like part of the air duct. Derek tapped the studs, listened, then pried it open with a crowbar. Inside were 4 leather-bound ledgers, a series of labeled manila envelopes, and a thick stack of letters labeled contingency correspondence. I opened the first notebook. My blood ran cold. It wasn't just HOA violations. It was dossiers, detailed entries on every family in the neighborhood, income reports, property valuations, marriage issues, school performance of children, medication routines, political affiliations, all handwritten. She's been building psychological profiles, I muttered. Derek nodded grimly. For leverage. Each page included a risk rating and a strategy, like she was planning campaigns. Some notes were short, quiet, easily pressured, responds to authority. Others were brutal. Wife's DP, ration is worsening, consider safety check threat. And some were terrifying. One page was dedicated to Logan and me. At the top it read, clean family, control status, failed. Beneath that, son exhibits high loyalty to father, rapid escalation under threat conditions, father likely train child in weapons, recommend full isolation campaign. If resistance continues, escalate to social collapse protocol. What the hell is social collapse protocol? I asked aloud. Derek didn't answer. Because he was holding something else now, one of the sealed envelopes marked with our address. Inside, a copy of an anonymous letter addressed to Child Protective Services, claiming emotional abuse, firearm endangerment, delusional paranoia. It hadn't been sent. Yet. She was going to report me as unstable, I whispered. She was going to have Logan taken. This wasn't just about control anymore. This was annihilation. We photographed everything, every page, every plan, every tactic. Then we locked the cabinet, closed the panel, and walked out. No damage, no fingerprints, just ghosts in the dark. By morning, I had a copy of every document stored on 3 encrypted drives, one with me, one with Derek, and one locked in a safety deposit box 2 counties over. The war had changed. We weren't victims anymore. We were whistleblowers. And Cheryl Ross? She wasn't just a bad neighbor. She was a monster in a cardigan. And now I had the receipts. By sunrise, the truth wasn't a secret anymore. We didn't leak it to the press, not yet. We did something simpler, smarter, more suburban. We printed it. 200 pamphlets, high-res photos of the basement files, scans of Cheryl's handwritten collapse strategies, the fake CPS letter, the psychological profiles of innocent neighbors. All of it compiled into a glossy, brutal expose titled Behind the Fence: How One Woman Turned Our HOA into a Machine of Fear. By noon, every mailbox in the neighborhood had one. We didn't ring doorbells, didn't wait for responses. We just walked, block by block, and delivered the truth like a slow-moving flood. By 3 p.m., my phone was on fire. First, texts. Is this real? She had notes on my daughter? What the actual hell is this? Then came the calls. People who hadn't spoken to me in weeks now wanted to talk, cry, apologize. I heard it in their voices, the realization that they weren't paranoid, weren't weak, weren't alone. Cheryl had done this to all of us. That night, for the first time in months, people came to my door, not to complain, not to accuse, but to say, "We believe you." Some of them brought their own stories, silent punishments, mysterious fines, threats that made no sense at the time, but now painted a sick, clear picture. And then came the knock. Different, heavy. I opened the door to two men in suits, not cops, not neighbors, feds. "Mr. Clean?" one of them asked. "We'd like a word regarding a developing case of mail fraud, digital impersonation, and organized harassment involving your homeowners association." I stepped aside. "Yes, gentlemen, I have everything." I handed them the drives. All three. I'd made clones. The lead agent flipped through a few pages, barely concealing his disgust. "She forged government documents?" "She made up her own task force," I said, "with uniforms and warrants." "Did she ever cross state lines with these materials?" Derek stepped into the room, arms folded. "She moved through at least 4 states, same tactics, different names." That was all they needed. The wheels were already turning. But Cheryl wasn't the kind of person who waited for the knock at her door. The next morning, my car was keyed from bumper to bumper. A red X was painted across our front door. And when I logged into my bank account, I saw 4 fraudulent charges, small, surgical, just enough to let me know someone had my numbers. She wasn't going to fight this in court. She was going to fight it her way. I called the bank, froze the accounts, called a locksmith, replaced the locks, reinforced the door again. Derek installed an internal camera system, wired, no cloud. I didn't trust smart security anymore. Logan watched it all without asking questions. But that night, after everything calmed down, he said something I'll never forget. "Dad, if this doesn't stop soon, are we still going to be okay?" I looked at him, at the scar this whole thing had carved into his childhood, and I lied. "Yeah, bud, we're going to be just fine." But inside I knew Cheryl was cornered, and a cornered animal doesn't run, it bites. The last time I saw Cheryl Ross, she wasn't wearing pearls. She wasn't in a cardigan, or her signature pastel blouse, or those fake HOA lanyards she always wore like a badge. She was sitting in a cold metal chair, behind 3 inches of bulletproof glass, wearing a county-issued jumpsuit. Her hair was frizzed, her face pale, but her eyes? They were the same, sharp, cold, like someone who still thought she was in control of the room, even though every control had been stripped away. She leaned forward, pressed her hands against the glass, and smiled. "You think you won," she said. I didn't answer. I just set down the envelope. Inside were copies of her basement dossiers, the ones the FBI used to press charges. 24 counts of mail fraud, 9 counts of impersonating a government official, 3 charges of conspiracy to commit assault, and 1 federal count for attempted child endangerment. They offered her a deal. She didn't take it. Too proud, too stubborn, too deluded to realize the world she built. That little kingdom of lawn chairs, fines, and forged warrants was never real to begin with. "You built this prison yourself," I finally said. Every rule you broke, every life you messed with, you did this. Her smile didn't move. And yet, they still locked me up for protecting order. Imagine that. I stood up. You weren't protecting order, Cheryl. You were building a cult, and the only difference between you and a warlord was a cul-de-sac. Then I walked out. She called after me, but I didn't look back, because the story wasn't hers anymore. It was Logan's. It took time, months of therapy, of late-night talks, of learning to breathe again when the wind knocked over a trash can and it sounded too much like footsteps. But he healed. And not in the way kids fake healing to make adults stop asking. He really healed, bit by bit, drawing again, and playing chess with Derek on Saturdays, reading books that weren't about war for a change. We moved. Not because we were scared, because we were done. Done with the place, the memories, the shadows on the front door that never quite washed out. We sold the house to a family with twin girls and a golden retriever. They never met Cheryl, and I hope they never hear her name. The HOA dissolved 6 months after her arrest. Turns out, when the monster is gone, people stop pretending the system worked. They tore up the old bylaws, voted to disband. One by one, the neighbors started talking again, rebuilding trust, repainting fences without asking permission. Freedom didn't come from outside. It came from remembering they were never really powerless. They were just told they were. And Logan, he still checks the locks, still pauses at 3 a.m. if the house creaks. But he sleeps. And sometimes, when I pass by his room, I hear music, not alarms, not drills, music. And I know deep down the night he stood in that hallway with a pistol shaking in his hands, it didn't steal his innocence. It revealed his courage. He wasn't a boy in that moment. He was my shield, my echo, my legacy. Now I tell this story not for revenge, not even for justice, but for warning, because somewhere right now, in some quiet neighborhood wrapped in promises of safety and smiles, there's another Cheryl, another HOA tyrant, another neighbor with a God complex and a clipboard, and they're counting on your silence. But silence is where monsters grow. So if you're still listening, don't wait for your door to get kicked in. Speak now, before the lawn's smiles turn into battlefields, before community becomes control, before someone else's, Logan has to do what mine did. Because in the end, it wasn't just a story about a fake HOA. It was a story about how easily freedom disappeared when we stopped noticing who's writing the rules, and how one kid with a steady hand and a brave heart reminded us all what it means to fight back.